Well, hello everybody. Uh, Coming to you again for a continuation of our study in Genesis. I'm going to do a little something outside today. Hopefully the traffic won't be too loud. We can finish this. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 4, and we're going to be doing verses 1 through 16. But before we do, I just want to start us out with a little word of prayer. We thank you, God. Your love extends to us in ways we cannot understand, but it always does, and you always show yourself amazingly, and we just submit to your love in this moment and ask that you would teach us something in your word. Please bless this time in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Well, today in chapter 4, let's start out with verses 1 through 7 really fast and see what we get into. It says this: Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother. Oh, I'm sorry, that's verse 7. Let's pause there for a short minute. So here we have the birth of Cain and Abel, the first two humans after we see Adam and Eve. Cain is the elder, Abel is the younger. Cain grew crops. He was an agricultural person in the sense that he grew plants, whereas Abel, also agricultural, grew sheep. He was a livestock farmer. And so they both had an opportunity here to bring an offering to God. Now I want you to notice that at this point in the story of humanity, there's not a sacrifice for sin being mentioned. This isn't some sort of idea that a penalty has to be paid for yet. That hasn't come into the picture. This is simply an offering. And in ancient days, offerings had many different means or meanings, but there's some primary ones that always come out. And so there are some offerings that are just pure gratitude. A person believes that a God has blessed them. In this case, there were probably people that believed in other gods that would have been reading this when it was written, and so that they understood that they would be grateful, and so they would make a sacrifice out of gratitude, an offering. There were other types of offerings as well. If you felt obligated, meaning that you would incur the wrath of a god if you did not offer a sacrifice, you would offer a sacrifice. And that's not necessarily a gratitude thing. That's it's almost like paying a tax in a way to a god, or an extortion of some sort, some protection money. But there's no gratitude associated with that. It's just, I'm trying to stay alive and well, that sort of thing. But then there is another type of offering or sacrifice that's made in these older days like this. And that is we can call it in our understanding a quid pro quo, a this for that. Meaning that if there is something that I want, then I will make this offering, and this God will hear my prayer because of that offering. It made them happy, and they'll maybe do the thing that I want them to do. It's a quid pro quo that I can affect the attitude and the outcome of the God and the outcome of this by this offering. And so those were kind of the big ones in the times that we're talking about here. This is the earliest of history. And so if we understand those things, we can see maybe what's going on, because really, without any extra context, it's hard to understand what's going on with Cain and Abel, because it's like, well, Cain made an offering, right? Wouldn't that make God happy? And I'm willing to bet that maybe sometimes in your life you've made either some sacrifices of something, or maybe you've put in some money in the offering at church and you just get the idea, I'm not getting a lot back on my investment. Well, maybe the reason is that you've kind of misunderstood what God is looking for in the offering. Now, keep in mind that this isn't the sacrifice for sin idea yet. This is just merely an offering. It's an interaction with God. So let's look and see what the differences here are. One of the keys here is the description that it uses for Abel's offering. It says he offered the firstborn and the fat portions. These were the highly cherished parts of any animal. I'm not talking about sacrifices. I'm talking if you had gone to the butcher and you said, I want the best thing you got, here, then the fat portions are the pieces that you would be purchasing. So this is the very best. And the fact that it's a firstborn animal also tells us something. The firstborn animal, anytime it shows up as a sacrifice in the Bible, it's being given as a gratitude to God. And so here we see that Abel's sacrifice is an offering of gratitude. It is one where he is thankful for what God has given, and he is not holding back at all. He's not holding back the fat portions for himself to eat. He's actually giving the very best thing to God, and God receives his sacrifice not because any sheep are particularly better than others, but because the attitude in Abel's heart is one of gratitude, an attitude of gratitude, just clearly thankful. And the contrast here is with Cain, and with Cain it just said, let's see here, in verse 3 it says, in the course of time Cain brought the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. That's it. There's no specification that he brought him anything particularly special, or if it was even the first fruits. It's a different type of heart thing, and so this is a different type of offering. Cain has a different attitude here than Abel. And what happens? Abel's offering is accepted and Cain's is rejected. Now, I would just like to point out that even with us, we are going to find times when we want to make a sacrifice or an offering, and maybe we're going to feel like it's not accepted or God hasn't received it and blessed us or whatever. Those are not times to walk away from God, okay? What it is time to do is maybe to have a little bit of internal reflection and maybe see if we're doing things with wrong motives, or maybe we have a wrong heart attitude about what we're doing. Because if Cain was giving out of he was grudgingly giving because he felt like that would avoid God's wrath, then he's giving because it's an insurance policy. And that's not what God wanted. Or if he's giving because he's trying to get something from God, that's a transactional model. That's like going to Walmart and purchasing something. And that's not the type of relationship that God is looking for. God is looking, and you can go all the way back to the prior part of this. What God is looking for is just a face-to-face relationship with us, one in which we love Him and He loves us. It's a two-way road. It's a mutual love situation that God's looking for. And so when we look at it in that light, it starts to make a lot more sense of what was going on in Cain's mind and in his heart and in his spirit. So the point here is that offerings come from the heart. Offerings come from the heart. Yes, there's a component of something that we're giving up and bringing to the situation. But in ancient days, something that I think goes along with this is when people did a sacrifice of something out of gratitude, they actually ate some of it at the altar, indicating that they were doing so with that God. And so in this moment, we could see that Abel was participating in a moment of gratitude, and he shared in the offering with God. And Cain would have likely tried to do the same thing, but we don't see that as far as how his attitude was going. And so God invites us to be participants even in the offering. And so they're from the heart. An offering of gratitude and celebration, which is what Abel was doing, it's an indication of the relationship that you desire with God. It indicates to us that Abel was wanting this relationship with God. And if you bring your offering to God with the same attitude of celebration and gratitude, then God sees that as an indicator of the relationship you want to have with Him. So think about that when you're giving your offerings, okay? You know, it's not about, we do receive offerings so that we can pay salaries, keep the lights on, perform ministry. That's a lot of what we do it with. But really the important thing there, see, God always provides. God always provides in that arena. The important thing is what heart are you doing your offering in? Because as we'll see in just a moment, if we don't give an offering with the right heart and we won't receive the correction that God gives us, then it can lead to some severe consequences in our lives. And let's continue on with that. Let's see, starting in verse 8, it says, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. And then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel, your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer give you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. And whoever finds me will kill me. And the Lord said to him, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. And then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Okay, so let's dig into this. First of all, verse 8 shows us the first murder in the Bible, and if we had to look at this, it's a result of Cain not dealing well with the correction he received from God. See, he already had a problem before he brought his grain sacrifice, right? He already had a heart issue because God didn't receive his sacrifice, and so that's an indicator there was already a heart issue at work. And then when his sacrifice wasn't received, instead of receiving the correction, because God told him, sin is waiting at the door. Sin's waiting there, and you must master it. But Cain didn't deal with it the way God told him to, and so he just let this jealousy and this bitterness build up within him, and then he killed his brother out in the field. First murder in the Bible, which is terrible. And it's between two brothers. Not part of God's plan. So we have one verse that describes this, and all the other verses that we just read are dealing with the consequences. And that's often how sin is. It only takes a moment. It might just be a little thing in that moment, but it takes a very long time to deal with the outcome, to deal with the consequences. And if I had to say anything about this passage, is that you should pay attention to life, because everything we do, no matter if it's good or bad, has a consequence in some form. So let's see what's going on here. Verse 9, it's interesting, I think, to see there's a duplication of a pattern. Back in Genesis 3, when humanity fell, when God first talked to Adam, he says, "Why are you hiding?" And Adam says, "I'm naked." Well, God already knew what happened. Instead of coming out and just confronting that way, God asked questions to get Adam to confess. And he does the same thing here with Abel. It says, "And the Lord said to Cain, 'Where is Abel your brother?' 'I do not know,' he said. 'Am I my brother's keeper?'" Ooh, so God already knew. He had heard the ground crying out, receiving the blood of Abel. He already knew what had happened. He was trying to get Cain to confess. He's seeking a confession for sin. Now, why does God do this? If we step back and look at it from a certain perspective, God is always about trying to get us to recognize what the truth is. Whenever we're wrapped up in sin, it prevents us from fully seeing and understanding the truth. And so what we do in those moments, or what God's trying to do in those moments, is to get our attention and to move us back into the truth, into reality, because we deceive ourselves so much when we're in our sin. And the only way that we can get back to God is when the sin is dealt with and we're back in what is reality. And so that tells us something about God, is that even though we are sinful, He still desires relationship with us, but He can only do that if we have squarely gotten back into the idea of reality. Ultimately, it comes down for us to recognizing the lordship and the sonship of Jesus and the nature of His sacrifice for us. That's what gets us back into reality, to see the truth. And for Cain here, though, God is interrogating. He's asking him questions, trying to get him back there. So, he's seeking a confession for sin. Now, also what happened was, just like Adam tried to divert God with an auxiliary issue, not that he had eaten of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but he said, "I was naked." The naked part wasn't the real issue. That was a diversion, actually. The real issue was that Adam had eaten of the tree. I mean, why would God care if he'd have walked around with the fig leaves wrapped around him? I mean, if it could have been a thing like, oh, fashion. Fig leaves, that's great. But instead, it actually was a diversion. And here we see Cain diverts too. He says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Doesn't have anything to do with me. He tries to divert God. And so while it's not technically a lie, he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" It's definitely not the truth. And that's a lot of what happens when we're wrapped up in sin and dealing with it, is it causes us to become manipulative and to try to divert people's attention from the real issues, things of that nature. Sin is like that. And so, because it's all about lies, that's why Satan is the father of lies, is because this is how the fingerprints of that is all over this. This is how sin works. It's a diversion from the truth. God knows everything already. So my question would be is, how deceived are we to think that we can conceal anything from God? In both times we see sin already, in Genesis 3 and 4. God already knows the answers. He already has seen what's happened. Why do we think we can continuously deceive God? Is it because people don't get struck by lightning bolts whenever they sin? Well, God hasn't said that's the type of judgment that He deals with. Instead, the judgment that God deals with is the one where in the end of days we stand in front of his throne, and if our name is not in the Lamb's book of life, then our sin, it can't be forgiven beyond that moment. So really, don't look for lightning bolts to be the form of judgment, or bad things to happen to you on this earth to be judgment. Be fearful of where your eternal soul will reside if your sin is not dealt with by the blood of Jesus. That is what we must worry about. And let's finish up here. Let's see. In verse 13 and 14, now it says this. It says, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you've driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. He says, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Well, back in verse 7, God had said, if you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. God warned him about this. He warned him what sin was going to do to him. And Cain brushed it off and didn't pay attention to it. And now he can't handle the consequences. And there's so much that I see when I deal with people, and I hear their hurt and their pain and their brokenness, and very often they've done things that they knew they shouldn't have done, and now they can't handle the consequences of it. Now, don't get me wrong. God puts something in place here. He says, when Cain says that, he says, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him. And he put a mark on him so nobody would attack him. And so God, in a way, helps Cain deal with part of the consequences, and still it still implies that God is interested in the outcome of Cain's life and wants to walk with him and give him an opportunity to turn. But there are still consequences that Cain has to deal with. And I want to close with that today. It's just, to me, a very hypercritical thing that I think that people today do not deal with very much. And they're just not willing to hear what I'm about to say, and that is this. First of all, yes, God is a forgiving God. He will forgive you of your sin, and He will forget about that part of things, and He will help you on this earth. But if you continue, and if you sin willfully, there are going to be consequences to your sin. There are always consequences. God will not reject you after He's you can seek forgiveness and still be forgiven. Your name is in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's there. But getting out from under consequences is not something that it seems that God fully does. That means you've got to have an idea that you should be living your life in a good way that is prescribed by God. You've got to live your life under the lordship of Jesus. You've still got to be obedient. Later on in the Old Testament, He says that obedience is better than sacrifice. Why? Because obedience is a sacrifice of the self. It means you've laid down your own ideas and said, God's ideas are better, which is exactly what God was trying to do when He said, don't eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So my friends, yes, we've done bad things in life. Yes, there are consequences. And yes, God will walk with us and help us in the life to follow those things. But we shouldn't have a bad attitude because the consequences don't completely go away. And I think one of the reasons is that God very often will take the things that you've done and turn them into a good thing that gives glory to Him and His kingdom. And you get to be a part of that, and you get to watch it happen. So there's actually something for you to have gratitude for in that. And very often, the thing that we have to do to see it is to wait for it to happen. So know that consequences are out there. God is not against you in that regard, but there's always going to be things we have to deal with because of the things we've done in our past. It's okay. God still loves you, and God will help you move forward and walk with you in the days to come. God bless you, my friends, and I look forward to seeing you again